Today we read from the book of Vijay Gupta about Sri Babaji, the Himalayan Master, and it's chapter 30, A Brush with That. After a month in Kadgaria Dham, Babaji had decided that it was time to head to Herakan. Outstation devotees began to leave as the Mahayagya was over. Vishnudat, Vishnudut Shastri was planning to return home to Rajgarh on Dussehra. My mother too was going back with my brother. She had tears in her eyes, probably because she could see that she was losing me. 4 days after the Mahayagya, Babaji said, "Tomorrow morning we will go to Herakan. Make all the necessary preparations." When the Kadgaria priest Panchi learned of our plans, he became teary-eyed. I should see that parting with Babaji would be hard on him. I had been told that Herakan Dam was about 22 kilometers away from Kadgaria, and one could get there by foot as there were no other means of transportation. By morning, all our preparations were complete. Some of Babaji's devotees had reached Haldwani by bus and jeep and would be walking with us up the mountain path.
Hmm.
We set out for Herikan Mahadam accompanied by a procession of about 100 devotees. We would undertake a 10-kilometer climb up the mountain to reach a mud track which has transcended a plateau and sloped downwards, or so I had been told. Our luggage had been loaded on horses. A Sikh devotee volunteered to drop some of our goods on his massive Ferguson tractor. It was so cramped that a sack of flour had to be tied to the tractor's bonnet, as all the space in the back was already taken. Along the way, Babaji and I distributed bundi prasad from a bucket to passers-by. The tractor crawled at a snail's pace behind us. I was so engrossed with the task at hand that I failed to see a small stone in front of me and stumbled and fell. The bucket of prasad slipped from my hand and rolled away, and I went sprawling flat on the ground. The front wheels of the tractor, which had been right behind me, went over both my legs. It came to a screeching halt as I screamed. The driver hadn't seen me fall because of the sack of flour on the bonnet.
Not chilly.
At the sound of my screams, a stampede ensued. Babaji came to me with some devotees and said, "Bid you get up." I was weeping and cried out, "Babaji, my legs have been cut." Babaji smiled. The serenity of his face called me. "Get up, your legs have not been cut." I stood up slowly with Babaji's support. I could feel the strength of his arms. They were like pillars. I felt a slight pain in my legs and winced. There was a hut nearby that doubled as a tea shop. Bit by bit, Babaji gently took me there. The devotees around us were getting nervous. Once I had been seated, Babaji said, "Biju, let us send you to a hospital." I shook my head. "No, Lord, why should I go to a hospital when I have you?" Babaji smiled before turning to the tea shop owner. "Bring me some mustard oil." The owner brought the oil and handed it to Babaji, who started applying it on the back of my knees. I said, "Lord, you must not do this." How could I let Babaji touch my legs? He paid no heed to me. And as soon as Lord Shiva in the form of Babaji touched my legs, my pain disappeared. Babaji then asked for a horse. When it came, he said, Birju, sit on the horse. Prabhuji, I will not sit on the horse while you walk. He looked stern. This is our order. I instantly obeyed and gingerly mounted the horse. Babaji walked beside me. After we had covered a short distance, he asked me, Are you in pain? I shook my head. No, Prabhu. His next words stunned me. Birju, if you had been somewhere else today, you would have been dead. Today was the day of your death. I looked to him speechlessly. Other devotees walking alongside also heard him. He had granted life to a nobody like me. What could be a greater miracle than this? Then, William, you will continue.
Chapter 31. A Night Halt. My mind was twirl, was a whirl. How could I possibly give milk and fruit to Babaji without bathing? Babaji seemed to have read my thoughts. He smiled and said that in the mountains a man could be clean without a bath, as the air was filled with purity. We had halted for the night in Ukaldunga village at Ram Singh's house, which fell on our way. It was about 7 p.m. by then. The days were now short, and dusk had already fallen. Ram Singhji, a very mild and virtuous person, welcomed Babaji reverently into his house. He was a teacher. He had a plaster of Paris idol of Prabhu in the temple in his house. Ram Singhji was the first person to have taken a photograph of Babaji performing his austerities at Mount Adi Kailash, which stands above the cave of Hirakan. Ram Singhji had made miraculous arrangements for our food and lodging, and I assured that I was allowed to stay near Babaji's room. After Aarti, everyone touched his feet, and Babaji called for an end to the evening once prasad had been distributed. We will leave for Hirakan from here at 7 in the morning, he announced. Our host took milk and fruits for Babaji's bhog. I was with him at the time, and after sipping some of the milk, he gave it to me and said, Add some turmeric and drink it. I did as I was told and was then ordered to sleep. Babaji woke me up in the morning before going to his bath. I bowed down to him, gathered his clothes, and handed them to Ram Singhji. Before leaving, Babaji issued stern instructions to me. You are not to bath for 3 days. I was appalled. Babaji, I have to prepare the chandan. I protested. It doesn't matter, he said. Prepare it without bathing. After his bath, Babaji chanted mantras with all the local devotees and then sat in meditation. In the meanwhile, preparation for the onward journey had begun. Hirakan was still about 12 kilometers away. Our ascent had ended at Ukladunga. We would now be descending all the way to Hirakan. The devotees left after breakfast, taking care to thank Ram Singhji for his hospitality. We also headed out soon after bidding Ram Singhi's family a, a fond farewell. Then the next chapter.
For me?
Yeah, if you like.
I need to get a book so I can read next time.
Okay. Heidekan at last. Ram Singh went to Heidekan with us. I was still on a horseback. Babaji kept stopping over now and then to ask me how I was feeling. At 11 a.m. we reached Heidekan Vishwa Mahadam. I got off the horse. Babaji held my hand. As soon as I felt his touch, my body started vibrating and a strange feeling washed over me. I could feel all my pain vanishing, and I knew I was cured. Babaji had performed yet another miracle. Chandramanji, who had regaled us with so many tales of Babaji's miracles in Vrindavan, was also present at Herakan. We entered the temple through a small footpath. There was a small Shiva temple in the middle. Babaji told us that the Shivling inside was about 200 years old and resembled the one of Kedareswar. There were big stone pillars around the temple and a hut in the front which had a duni, makeshift fire pit that sadhus dig to protect themselves from the cold. Inside there was a trident and a pair of tongs. On the northern side of the temple there was a stone and cement platform, about 7 feet long, 2 feet wide and 8 inches high. A mat had been spread over it. Babaji sat on this platform facing a Havan Kund that had turned a deep grey with years of smoke. Locals from the Harikan village had also arrived for Babaji's darshan and were bowing to him. There were 3 rooms made of stone, mud and dung on one side of the back. 2 of them were on the ground floor and the third room was on the floor above. I took our stuff, Babaji's and mine, to the room upstairs. Babaji had already plied me with instructions. Birju, you will be in the room upstairs and the others will be in the lower rooms. The woman will stay in one room and the men can take the other. There was no electricity in the ashram. I noticed that there was a tact in the room. I plunked our food provisions on one side and carefully placed Babaji's cloths on the other. Chandramani had brought milk from his house in an aluminium bucket. I used 3 bricks to build a makeshift stove behind the room below and fed it with wood to heat some milk for Babaji. Then I carried the warm milk to the room upstairs, informing him on the way that his milk was ready. Babaji was still downstairs seated at the duni near the temple. This was where he would sleep for a long time to come. After a while he came upstairs and handed the milk to him and then fed him raisins and cashews with my own hands. I still remember how I felt at that time. There was a strange thrill and honor in knowing that I fed the one who feeds the whole world, and the one whose Leela even the gods are eager to witness. And here I was feeling that Narayanan with my own hands. It was a great privilege. Khichdi, a dish made with rice and lentils, had been made as prasad for the devotees on that first day. Once we had finished eating this simple fare, I was finally free to observe the view. I realized that it was even more beautiful than Chandramani's description of it in Vrindavan. There were huge mountains in the northeast in front of the Harikan Vishwa Mahadam ashram. People told me that Nar in Narayan had meditated on one of the mountain tops, and Lord Shiva had stopped overnight at the other mountain, the Chota Kailas, in his return after marrying Sati. The river Gautamaganga was about 100 yards away from the temple and could be reached by a crude footpath. Everyone went there for their ablutions and to answer the calls of nature. Across the river was the Hadakant cave, and above it the Adi Kailas. Locals said that the river derived its name from the sage Gautam, who is said to have performed penance here. The Gautamaganga gushed through boulders, creating half a kilometer long channel between the temple and the cave. What an amazing place it was! Bhagwan Hariakan's Baba's temple had a huge pepple trees inside its complex at the ashram. Their size revealed that they were very old. At around 4 p.m., Babaji decided to go for a bath. I walked down with him to the river. Some followers came along too. I carried his cloths and brass kamandal, a water pot used by ascetics. We spotted an elderly man coming from the riverside, and Babaji hailed him. Govardhan Singh, come here. The gentleman bowed to Babaji, and they walked towards the Gautama Ganga together. There Babaji took off his clothes on the banks of the river and waded into the water. Once he had put some distance between us, he went supine and started floating. He kept drifting with the flow of the water, not moving his hands and feet, not even to keep balance while afloat. It was a sublime, stunning sight. Only an extraordinary being could stay so still in a moving water surface. I became lost in the wonder of his latest Leela. After 15 minutes he came out of the river. I wiped his body with a towel and helped him put on fresh set of clothes. As he walked up to the temple, he asked me to fetch some water in the kamandal, which he then offered to the shivling in the temple. I, in the meanwhile, went off to wash his clothes. The priest of the Shiva temple in Harakandam was Paramanandji, who hailed from a nearby village. On that first evening, he began with a regular temple aarti and followed it with one that was dedicated to Babaji. He was very old. Babaji asked me to give him some clothes. I bought a dhoti kurta from the room and gave it to Babaji, who handed it to the priest. A fire had been ignited in the duni, and some devotees were sitting near it, while others sat outside. A kirtan of Om Namah Shivaya was underway. Babaji was sitting in meditation. At 8 p.m., Babaji ordered everyone to retire for the night. He expected all of us to be up and ready for a bath in the river at 4 in the morning. His instructions for me were slightly different. You have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, take a bath and clean the temple. Make sure you also clean the duni. He covered himself with andi and went to sleep. I went up to the room and found I couldn't sleep because I was in panic. This place was taking a toll on me, but I did not dare breathe a word about it to anyone, with an effect it was having on me. At 3 a.m. sharp my eyes flew open and I dutifully walked towards the Gautama Ganga with my clothes and a bucket. The air was icy even though it was only October. I wondered what it would be like in the dead of winter. I shivered as I stripped and entered the river. My body became numb as soon as I immersed myself in the freezing water. I scrambled out of its frosty embrace as fast as I could and sat down on a boulder with a towel wrapped around me. There was a fast moving breeze, and there wasn't a soul in sight. All of a sudden, I felt an intense wave of nostalgia for my home in Bharatpur. A short while later, having donned a fresh set of clothes, I started climbing up with a bucket of water. Today, there are 108 steps from the top to the Gautama Ganga, and it is difficult to traverse the distance even when there is nothing to carry. But at that time, Babidi had imbued me with so much power that I used to come out with 2 buckets of water in, at a time using the footpath. Babidi was already in meditation. I took out a fresh set of cloths for him and handed them to some devotees who were already there waiting to accompany him. He proceeded towards the river and I started preparing the chandan. There were days in winter where the chandan would literally scrape the skin of my palms, but I would carry and doggedly determined to do my best for Bhavadi. I would clean the temple, light a lamp, and apply a paste of mud and dung on the duni. By around 6 every morning, Babidi would sit upright on his kushan, a seat mat made of kusha grass, and ignite the fire in the duni for a small havan. He would make offerings of ghee and other items. The light of the flames in the havan kund would fall on his forehead and illuminate his entire body till it was shining like gold, increasing the wonder of his beauty manifold. The Havan would be followed by an arti, and it was only after it was over we felt free to turn to chores that were a part of our daily routine. At 9 in the morning, on our first day at Herakan, Babidi said, Birju, let us show you the cave, and I walked to the cave with Babidi and some devotees. There were several streams flowing in the Gautama Gange, and Babidi predicted, you will see one day the number of people who come to Herakan will equal the number of stones that are here. There will be a constant flow of people from all parts of the world. And I thought, God knows when that will happen. There isn't even any proper place to live. But knowing Babidi as I did, I knew that his word come to pass. He was a great being, and if there was a God somewhere in this world, he lived in this venerable Herakan Baba. Babidi could solve the greatest problems in a matter of seconds. It will definitely happen, I thought to myself. But when? Babidi interrupted my thoughts and I realized that we had reached the cave. Birju, he said, this is where we come from. It goes into Nepal, all the way to Mount Kailas. I bowed before the sacred cave. He sat there soaking in the atmosphere for a while and suddenly said, we will build temples here too. Nobody had ever envisioned that a temple could be built there, but Babidi, barely a day after returning to Herakan, was already teeming with ideas. I could see his resolve was stiffening, and I knew that once he had made up his mind, he would make things happen. There would be a temple there, and there eventually were 9 of them. Babidi decided to stay on in Herakan for the time being. First of all, he had boundary walls built around the temple. Devotees of Lord Herakan would come to see his world on foot, making the 22-kilometer long trek to reach him. Food came on horses from Haldwani, as did the cement. There was a community kitchen, and all the devotees would get together to cook the prasad. It was only made once a day. Meals were eaten together and prasad was distributed. Devotees would line up all the way to the Gautama Ganga to send water up to the temple. At that time, even utensils had to be carried down to the river for cleaning. I was very fond of drinking tea. Lakshmi Narayani had brought a light stove from Haldwani on which I used to heat milk for Babaji. Chandramaniji used to bring milk and curd from his house every morning at 8 for Babaji. His village was about 3 kilometers from Harakan. Chandramani had also developed a great affection for me over time and would spend hours describing the days that he had spent with Babaji. During this period, Babaji used to give darshan round the clock, sometimes at the Duni, sometimes outside, sometimes near the wall that was under construction. It was a time when Babaji was always on the move, walking around, flinging instructions at artisans. He kept stressing the importance of karma and demonstrated this in a number of ways. Wood was used for offerings and cooking. The requirements grew rapidly as the number of devotees visiting the dam mounted by leaps and bounds. Sometimes he would go down to the river, pick up the massive logs floating on it, and carry them all the way up on his shoulders. This had a huge impact on devotees and proved to be a perfect cure for slackers. Offenders guilty of indolence would instantly get energized into action, while the more conscientious among the disciples would try to prevent him from picking up the logs. Why are you carrying wood when we are here? They would ask. Pat would come to the reply. How can we ask you to do something if you are not willing to do it ourselves? His words would effectively reduce everyone to either silence or shame, depending on how hard they had been working. Some devotees were curious about his food habits and asked him why he didn't eat grains. He laughed and said, "We will one day, when the time is right." In the early days, when there was paucity of accommodation at the ashram, people would sleep on sheets at the Patrikrama stall, some kind of place in the temple. Babaji would tell his devotees on beforehand how much prasad they needed to make each day. His estimates were never wrong, and new visitors would discover that he was Antarjami, an omniscient one, when meals were served. He displays his prescience in other ways too. Sometimes he would mention incidents that he had taken place in the outside world. His predictions would be borne out a few days later when the newspaper, always a few days old, would be delivered to the ashram. The newspapers were always highly prized items and eagerly awaited, even when they were not trying to check out Babaji's statements, because they formed a tenuous link for us with the world outside. Time went by. Sometimes, while bathing in the Ganges in the morning, it used to get so cold that I would miss home. Babaji always knew and would smile and say, "Birju is missing home." I would laugh in response, and he would remark, "Worry is like a pyre." As always, he was right. When I think of Babaji today, I remember his many kindnesses to me. I never even suffered from a fever or a cough while I was with him. The life that lay ahead of me I owed to him, because he had said while we were on the way to Herakan, "If you were somewhere else today, you would have been dead." Today I'm proud to write that if there is a God somewhere, he existed in Harakan Wale Baba, whom we saw all in his flesh. There are images of Lord Ram and Lord Shiva that we carry in our heads, but I have never met a person who could pinpoint Lord Hirakan's form of claim. I've seen him. This is what he was like. He was an Anjanu Bahu, a person whose hand reached his knees. One of the 32 signs in Hinduism which typically mark a man as a god, saint, or king. The shape of his neck was like a shivaling. His body emanated the fragrance of chandan. He had all the qualities which define divinity and all the colors which we expect of a god. Yes. Was it a nice story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also liked it.
I have it here. It's
Ah,
electric form.
yeah, the electric farm.
Mm.
And maybe, William, you should tell the readers where they can get it. Is it possible to get it on Amazon?
Probably. Yes, I think so, but I'm not sure. I think you can get it on Amazon.
Okay, now then, thank you for being present with us. I'm closing for our listeners. And if you like to know more, then please write to us in the comments. We'll feed back to you.
Okay.
Yes.